Well, that's weird. It's kind of weird to do an intro that has Jerry in it, and it's just me tonight. So Jerry's not here. He is on a family vacation. He is over in Minnesota, enjoying the heat and some good family time. So it's just going to be me tonight, and I'm going to need your assistance. Jerry's here. Are you going to get on the show, Jerry? Do you want on the show? Do you want in the back door? Oh, that sounded so. Do you want me to let you in the show? Wow. I swear to God, I haven't had anything to drink. I promised Dwayne no drinks. Just I'll have to censor out what I said a minute ago. Let me jump over to Facebook really quick and see if Jerry's asking for the link to get on the show. If he is, I will. I'll send him the link, and if he doesn't want to get on the show, then I am rolling solo. Yeah, I know, right, Jerry? That was horrible. I know. Yeah, we're starting already, Dwayne. It's been a long week. Okay, I'll just say that. So, anyways, so tonight's show. Okay, so Jerry can't join the show, which is fine. He's on vacation. I don't expect him to. I'm sure he doesn't have all his gear set up there to do a show, so that's fine. Enjoy the family time. But this week's show, I just want to spend some time going over. I know I hate doing this. I'm going to be that guy that shares the slides of his vacation with everybody, sort of, but instead of it, being Uncle Joe sharing his slides of the show and talking about how Aunt Marge, whatever, tripped getting out of the truck or whatever on vacation, I'm going to actually talk about why I shot what I shot, what gear I used. I'll talk about settings that I used and why I used those settings, etc. So hopefully, for those watching and seeing the photos, yeah, that's right. I'm sporting my Olympus shirt tonight. That's right. I still have Olympus gear. This is being recorded or broadcast live on an OMD EM1 Mark II and a 7-14. So I could actually just go really wide with this. Oh, no, it's already, there we go. Look, it's all of me, including the boom arm for my mic. So, yeah, we'll talk about that. So I'm going to talk about gear selection, why I went with what I went with, etc., while I'm going over the photos. And I would love it if anybody has any questions. That's what I was hoping for. See, Dwayne, save the questions for later. I'll answer any of your questions you might have on the areas that Shelly and I went to on this road trip. So I have to mention that this wasn't like a solo trip where I went all by myself. I brought my girlfriend Shelly along, and that was honestly 90% of my excitement for this trip was being able to bring her to new places she'd never seen before, because some of these were places I had been at least once or twice. So it was fun to be able to bring not just someone you care about to someplace like that, but someone you care about and is also a photographer, so that you could see their excitement in the stuff that you're seeing. So we'll kind of go over that. So pretty much I'll start off with the gear that I brought. And if you've been following the show for a while, or me, I've got more gear than I should have. So that makes gear selection a little difficult. I knew that a part of my trip was going to, hopefully, fingers crossed, involve chasing some stormy weather. So there was a lot of thought put into, should I bring a piece of Olympus kit with me for like live composite and stuff for shooting at night, lightning and things like that. I know you probably won't be surprised, and if you're an Olympus watcher or a listener, you'll be not shocked and disappointed at the same time that I didn't end up bringing any Olympus gear on this trip, simply because I would have ended up bringing like duplicates of a lot of equipment that way, because I wanted to bring my Sony stuff. I wanted to bring the A7R3. It's the highest megapixel count image maker that I've got. And the reason that I wanted to bring that is because I was hoping that there'd be opportunity for wildlife photography on this. And while I do have, a long reaching lens, the Sony 200 to 600 millimeter, putting that on, sorry, here, got something going on my screen. There we go. Putting that on the 42 megapixel A7R3 allows me additional reach via cropping. So that was kind of the rationale for bringing, that piece of kit. And I knew that if I brought the Olympus along, I'm going to end up bringing, basically duplicate lenses of what I'm already bringing for the Sony kit. And it just made more sense. I have a Pelican case that is set up for all my Sony gear, and it's easy to put pretty much everything other than that 200 to 600 all fits in one Pelican case. So 2 bodies, and like 4 lenses all fit in that. And those lenses cover everything from 14 millimeters all the way to 180 millimeters, all with like Tamron and Samyang lenses. And then a separate Pelican case for that 200 to 600. So I got away with only bringing 2 cases of gear, and the case for the 200 to 600, it's a smaller Pelican case. It's not massive. So it allowed me to be compact. If I had brought the Olympus gear along as well, I'd be bringing an additional bag with all of that gear. And of course, probably like a charger or something of that nature. I guess I could USB charge them, but still, it would have just been duplication. And we drove my Ford Bronco, and the Bronco isn't exactly cavernous inside. There's a pretty good amount of room in the back, but we still had, the back was filled up with a couple of suitcases, Pelican cases. And of course, I mean, Shelly's bringing camera gear too. So she had camera bag and, other bags as well. So it just didn't make sense. So long story short, I went with Sony, but I did have my Fuji in the glove box too, in case something caught my eye that fit into the look that I'm going for with the Sony, which it never did. I was so one-track mind on landscapes and weather that I didn't really come across too much that the Sony would have been useful for me. So now it was Sony dominant. And so that was the A7 III and the A7R III. Those are my 2 bodies for Sony. And then I had a Samyang 14 millimeter f2.8. So that's my widest lens that I could bring, other than an old fisheye lens that I did not bring. So 14 millimeters. And then I have the Tamron 17 to 28, which is my next widest, but it's got a little bit of reach to it and a little bit of variation in the focal length. And then the Tamron 28 to 75, which is like a great just walk around all kinds of stuff lens. And then the Tamron 70 to 180. And then of course the big 200 to 600. So that rounded out, that's my whole kit right there. I did bring along a couple of tripods. Since I'm not hooked up with my earphones tonight, I'll grab my tripod so I can show you the tripod that I brought along. Here we go. So I brought along a big, I'll call it a big tripod. It's not like it's massive or anything, but this is the VO 263AB from Vanguard. And I brought a bigger tripod because I wanted stability, because I didn't know if when storm chasing, I would run into like severe winds. And travel tripods are great. I've brought along a Vanguard travel tripod as well. But if it gets really windy, I want something that's a little more robust to bring along. So this was the tripod that I brought along with me on that trip. So that pretty much rounds out my entire kit for the trip. I did buy a trigger before the trip from Myops. My hope was that prior to the trip, I get a little bit of experience using it, and then I would be able to use that to capture lightning during the day. And no, it did not work. It completely sucks at that. And even if it's kind of darker out, that trigger still sucks, because what you're doing is adjusting sensitivity of the trigger to flashes of light, and it was either not sensitive enough and it would miss flashes, or it was too sensitive, and if a lightning bug flew by in the distance, it would think that was lightning and it would trigger for that. So I can wholeheartedly say I had 0 success with the Myops trigger. So that was just a wasted piece of space in my kit. So I had to resort back to what I've been doing with the Sony equipment all along, which is time lapses, which, while it works, you always run the chance of lightning happening in between frames, which seems to happen more often than it should be statistically possible, but it seemed to do it anyways. And then you're also stuck with, 500, 1,000 frames to sift through looking for bolts of lightning. So that was that. But I will get going here and I'll start up an image share, and then I'll just go through equipment used and why I used what I used. Oh, well, look at that. Look at that. We got Jared here tonight. So again, I'll just kind of talk about gear selection, why I used what I used, what my settings were, etc. And again, if you have any questions about any of that, that I don't bring up when I'm talking about it, feel free to just interrupt me there with a question. So we'll start off here. This was basically our second night of this trip. Our first night involved us leaving my house here in Michigan about 5 o'clock in the evening or late afternoon, making it as far as Springfield, Illinois, and then crashing for the night, and then getting up the next morning bright and early and trekking all the way about halfway across Kansas. So this is about, I'm going to say 30 miles west of Hays, Kansas. And if the name Hays, Kansas sounds familiar, if you're a listener, it's probably because I've talked about it before, because that was where Mark Miller and I chased storms last summer. So Shelly and I made it out. We were watching the radar, and there were storms developing much further west, and they were a bit north of us. And I honestly didn't think we were going to get anything, but we just kind of thought, what the hell, we'll go driving around and just keeping an eye on the radar, knowing that a storm could be 50, 60 miles off in the distance or further and still be completely visible because of the landscape out there. So flat, so wide open, no obstructions. We drove around, really didn't see anything. It was still a little lighter out when we were doing it, but we just couldn't see anything on the horizon that led us to believe that there was anything coming, even though the radar indicated it. So we started to turn around and come back. And by then we were getting into the blue hour. It's getting darker a lot quicker. And in the rear view mirror, or the side view mirror behind me, I saw not just a flash of lightning, but a lightning bolt. And we decided to just kind of race around and find a good position, someplace that had a good open view, which is easy to do out there, and someplace that had something in the foreground other than just a road. So we ended up finding this little grain bin on just a random side road, again, west of Hays, Kansas, about 25, 30 miles. And we just set up our tripods and just started shooting. We were doing time lapses here again. Yes, this is where Olympus's live composite would be phenomenal. I will not argue that one single bit. The catch is that the dynamic range isn't there for me to be able to pull out any sort of detail in the foreground. So in this one, just because my settings probably weren't perfect, I wanted to be exposed properly for the sky. And when the lightning flashes, it's really easy to blow out an image. So I had to keep everything a little bit underexposed so that when we were getting bolts of lightning, it wasn't overexposed. And what that meant is that the foreground was just completely silhouetted. So on the Sony, and this is shot with the A7 III, I was able to use a gradient filter in Lightroom and lighten the foreground up without, any hesitation. There's no noise, no grain, no banding, anything like that. And unfortunately, my experience in the past on my Olympus bodies was that in a scene like this, if I tried to push those shadows much brighter than what they were off the back of the camera, they tend to fall apart really quick. They get real blocky and just not ideal. But again, great luck with how well it worked out on the Sony with this one. So nice and crisp and clean, plenty of detail, in the foreground. Trying to finagle this here on the screen so you can see it, but couldn't be happier with how this turned out with the Sony. And this is, again, Sony A7 III. I think I'm at ISO 800 on this because I was doing, again, what I could to get the foreground lighter, or at least give me a chance to lighten it more. Wide open, or no, I'm sorry, not wide open. This was stopped down a little bit. So this is probably at f5.6 and ISO 800. And this is on the 28 to 75 millimeter. I started off really wide, which is, your head always gravitates towards a wide lens for the wide open spaces. But when you're shooting scenes like this, you tend to want to be able to have a little more reach. You want to bring that lightning bolt that's off in the distance closer by compressing the background. So longer focal length is what worked for this shot. So again, that's just what I ended up going with on that one. So this was Not bad for our first like legit night out on the road. Again, west of Hayes, Kansas there. And let me get on to the next one here. Why? Oh, I got to zoom out a little bit more. There we go. All right. So then the next one was the next day. We only had one night in Kansas. And the next day we got up and we started to make our way towards Colorado. And I highly encourage anybody that takes any kind of a trip like this to allow yourself the freedom to completely deviate from your plans altogether. We went into this trip with a loose itinerary, knowing that if we wanted to, we would spend 4 days in one place or we'd spend 4 hours in one place. It didn't matter. We just kept it flexible. And this was a result of that flexibility. We were driving through Western Kansas, not too far from the Colorado border. And we saw this little rickety billboard on the side of the highway that said, "Come see Castle Rock." And Shelly said, "You want to go do it?" I said, "Yeah, let's do it." So we turned off, ended up being 21 miles to get to it, off on a dusty road in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, and found this very cool place. It was like a mini Badlands in Kansas. The stone was very yellow and it's just a very unique substance. I know Shelly brought a little piece of it back and she went to rinse it off because she was rinsing off some of the rocks she gathered on this trip, and the thing just started to dissolve. So very cool piece of geography out there. And I just loved the contrast that you got between this wildly yellow soil, rock, sedimentary stuff against the blue sky. Again, one of those things you get out in those wide open spaces, the skies are just so intensely blue out there. This was shot obviously really close up to the rocks here. This was shot with the Samyang 14 millimeter f2.8 on the Sony A7 R3. And another thing I tend to do with the Sonys, I kind of leave them in auto ISO almost all the time because I never really have to worry about how far it pushes it, and I'll just let it adjust accordingly. And this is stopped down too, so I'm probably at like f8 or f11 on this. I just wanted some depth in the shot as well, so I wanted to be able to have detail in the rock in the foreground all the way through to the back of the rock. Really cool spot to visit. It's one of those things that probably hardly anybody ever goes out to it too often. We were out there. There was one car leaving when we got out there. There's a bunch of kids. I think they're out there drinking or getting high or whatever, kids do now. But Shelly and I were out there for over an hour with just the two of us. And it was pretty awesome place. So Castle Rock, Western Kansas. And this next shot it's funny. It's something I've been wanting to do forever. Is I wanted a windmill and I want big storm clouds. And this was about as close as I could get to that. And this is just into Colorado on the other side of the border from Kansas. Not sure exactly where. I'd have to get out my Google Photos and look at the exact location. But it was, again, talking about that freedom of not constraining yourself to a rigid schedule. Saw these clouds building, and Shelly and I decided that at the very next exit, we were just going to get off and see if there was anywhere we could go to get a shot of these clouds that were building up into a potential storm that would have happened later on that day. So jumped out. And again, it's one of those things where if you've got something in the distance, I really recommend playing around with using a longer focal length to bring those things in the distance closer to the foreground. So this was shot with the Tamron 70 to 180 at 180 millimeters. And this is on the A7 R3 as well. Choosing the R3 for some of these shots, the resolution is higher, so there's a lot more fine detail. And I have been a proponent for years of megapixels don't matter because 99% of people are going to see your work on their phone or on a tablet or something of that nature, But for me, I've been spending a lot of time going back and looking at my images myself at home or displaying them on my TV. I've got two 4K TVs, a big 75-inch one, and these photos look fantastic on a giant screen because of all that extra detail that I am getting out of the higher megapixel cameras. So I tended to shoot things where I knew that there was a lot of cool detail in them with the higher megapixel camera body. And I focused a little bit more on the lower light stuff with the A7 III. So again, nothing special here as far as settings go for this. The camera would have been an auto ISO for this. This would have been at 180 millimeters, and I would have stopped down for this as well because I did want everything in focus. I want the windmill in focus. I want the clouds in the background to be sharp and full of detail as well. So again, probably around f11 for this shot. And the next one was just around the corner from there. I wanted something bigger than that windmill to show a sense of scale on how big these storms are when they start building out west. So it was the same concept here. We just drove until we found this big granary. Again, it's so wild to see something like this. You're in the middle of nowhere, and there's a tiny dusty town that has maybe a blinking light in it if you're lucky, and one convenience store, and then something like this there. And I loved the light that was just reflecting off of these shiny new, grain silos out there, and just kind of positioned myself for that. Shot it obviously in portrait orientation because the clouds and everything were so high, and shooting it at a longer focal length of 180 millimeters, the only way to fit anything into the frame as far as the clouds are concerned was to switch this up into a portrait orientation shot. And again, stopped down excessively, probably again f11 or greater to get that deeper depth of field, the deeper focus. A7R3 for this as well. And I guess I could zoom in just to show you like the amount of detail that I'm talking about. It's very crisp, the amount of detail on this. So I'm zoomed in at, I don't know how many percent of normal. I'm for sure 200% of normal. And there's still a ton of detail in this. So there is a value to a higher megapixel camera. And if you're on the Olympus, if I would have had my Olympus with me, then I would have done a handheld high-res mode shot for this. So it's not like it can only be done on Sony. I just mentioned the resolution because it was the gear I had with me. And I'm going to keep going on that theme of let your plans be flexible. So as Shelly and I were on I-70 headed towards Denver, we saw this wild looking weather developing off to our, I guess it was to our southwest a little bit, and ended up being a scenic highway, a scenic byway that kind of takes you into Denver, but it takes you the long way. And it was this 2-lane, long, twisty, curvy, windy road out in farm country. And, again, we saw the sign for it. I said, "You want to do it?" And she's, "Yeah, a nice thing as well, having somebody to travel with you that is totally cool with not having a plan." So that's what we did. We ended up, it was probably another 40 minutes longer of a drive, 45 minutes longer of a drive, but we got to ride alongside this wild weather it was developing. So the low hanging stuff that you see there, those are called scud clouds. Lots of times people will see those and confuse it with a tornado that's forming. It's not, it's just how that structure looks. But we just kind of raced around and just got ourselves into position to shoot this. This was a weird one. The light was so wildly dynamic. I was able to recover a lot in the highlight area. There's still some spots in this, that are really bright. But this was shot with the Samyang 14 millimeter because I needed as much field of view as I could to fit in as much of this as I could. And, typical photographer fashion, we were looking for something to put into the shot, other than just a field. A rolling field would have been fine, but we found this, what used to be a road that is now not a road anymore. There's just a little bit of the asphalt you can see there, but then it just kind of devolves into a 2-track. So it made for great leading lines going into it. And for those who know me really well, you may be shocked to see that I left all the telephone poles and everything in this shot. I used to, I shouldn't say usually anymore. I used to clean all that stuff out, but I'm learning to appreciate those things in my shots a little bit more again, especially when they start adding a sense of scale to the scene. So again, this is going to be just east of Denver, Colorado. And I wish I could remember the name of the scenic byway. I could probably look it up, but you don't want to listen to me type. So I'll move on to the next one. And the next one, this was an amazing day. Again, in Colorado, we went to Estes Park and made our way to Rocky Mountain National Park, which, even though we knew that you needed reservations to get in, we still tried it anyways on that first day there, and were turned away like we should be because we didn't have a reservation. But just a note for anybody going to Colorado, you only need those reservations to get into the park between the hours of 9 and 3. So if you snuck in a little bit early, you don't need a reservation to get in. And if you come in after 3, you don't need a reservation to get into the park either. So, side note, we tried to get into the park, couldn't, ended up going off-roading on some kind of fun, pretty wild trails that went up into the mountains, about 20 miles. I think it was south of Estes Park, if I remember right. But we did return, came back. It was getting to be a little bit later in the day, so these tend to be a little bit higher ISO shots, but it was fun to find elk. We had seen one elk outside the Stanley Hotel, but as we started working our way, into Estes Park, we come across a pair of elk, actually 3 elk. The third one is off to the right of the frame here, but I loved how these 2 elk were positioned. I didn't have to maneuver them around at all. I didn't even have to really maneuver myself around to get this shot. And this is shot with the A7R3 and the 200 to 600 millimeter. They were, I will call it close, but not like super close. This is at 600 millimeter to get this shot. So, if you're shooting with the Olympus system or whatever, this would be like your 300 millimeter would look. So they were out there a little ways, but I loved that their antlers were in velvet and just how they were oriented for this shot. They still look a little scruffy because they've got their winter coat. You can really see it on the one in the foreground, but just kept the camera in auto ISO. I stopped down as much as I could stop down and still have a decent shutter speed because I wasn't using a tripod for this shot. So I'm probably down to f8, which still didn't give me enough depth of field to keep them both in focus. I tried 2 shots, one with each one in focus, and they did enough movement of their heads between them to where Photoshop couldn't merge them to give me a focus stacked image, unfortunately, but still happy with how this one turned out. Definitely exciting to see these guys. Yes. Oh, so I have to mention this. So Shelly says that those elk in this photo were a little less lively than the one at the Stanley Hotel. So Shelly and I visited the Stanley Hotel, and that is the hotel that the book The Shining was based upon. So we spent some time at the Stanley, and we were leaving and decided to walk kind of the property a little bit. And we get down towards the front of the property, and there is this big female elk laying down in the grass. And she was on the other side of the fence from us. There was a gate. We could have walked through the gate and went towards her, but we just looked through the gate, checked her out, and decided to leave. We jumped in my truck, spun out of the parking lot, and came around the front of the building where that elk was sitting. And as we rounded the corner, we see this young girl, probably early 20s or something, cell phone in hand, running down the sidewalk, and this elk come flying out behind her and turned the corner and stopped and was watching her. It had chased her away, and we didn't see exactly what happened, but my assumption is someone was trying to get a selfie with an elk and got a little too close, and it chased her completely out of the area. It was actually kind of hilarious. I mean, she wasn't hurt. She just looked like her ego was hurt, but it was definitely a treat to watch. So we almost got to see one of those people that would have ended up on the news because they were attacked by a wild animal, thinking that wild animals are meant for selfies. So take note of that. So this next one, after spending the time in Colorado, we spent a couple of days there. We decided to head up to the Dakotas, cut through a section of Wyoming to get there. And we were en route to Rapid City, South Dakota. And we saw this weather developing the whole time. Keep in mind, I'm such a freak about wanting to shoot weather that as we're driving, I'm periodically checking the radar. I'm checking weather forecasts the night before. So I knew there was a chance for weather. And as we got closer to Rapid City, the radar started to show this one cell starting to develop, and we could see it on the horizon. So we raced around a little bit to find a spot where we could get set up ahead of it and just photograph it as it approached. Now, I really wish that everybody could see it how it looks on my computer, but and I don't know if it shows through on your end, but there was a very turquoise tint in parts of the cloud structure here. You'd see it like under the ridges here in these different levels of the clouds. And if you see turquoise like that in a storm, it can be turquoise. It can be this very deep, unsettling looking blue, or sometimes even a green tinge to it. I'll just let you know that that generally means that there is hail being produced in that cell. Just because of the way hail reflects light, you get these really cool color casts. So we watched it, and I knew that there would be hail in this for sure. And we spent quite a bit of time here. We had a lot of time. It was very slow moving, and it was growing as it was moving. And we were lucky enough to find this really cool old house sitting up on a hill that had some really neat outbuildings. So I ran time lapses, and this is actually a frame from the time lapse that I worked on. But to give, again, a little bit of scale, normally I would Photoshop these things out, but I kept this little SUV as it was racing into the frame, again, for a sense of scale. But what I loved is this really interesting outbuilding that was here, and this very old looking outbuilding right here as well. Super cool. And we stayed there for a while until I saw a ball of hail hit the ground in front of us as we were standing there, and decided it was time to pack it up. So we did, packed it up, and decided to race out ahead of it and find another spot that was a little more open to photograph this as it was coming in. And that's where this next shot would be. And this is, again, we backtracked and went the opposite direction of Rapid City, and got about 20 miles further out, turned around to shoot this. And by this point, it had gotten in a little bit more open terrain, and it had picked up speed, and it picked up an quite a bit in intensity. And again, you can see the color in here in the, I guess, at the top of the leading edge of the shelf right here. It had really started to produce a lot of hail at this point, and it's pretty wild how clear and blue the skies are here over to the right. But I had just enough time to jump out, start to set up my tripod, pop off maybe like 3 or 4 shots, and then the hail started to hit, and we jumped back in the truck, sat there for a few minutes, and then I just decided, you know what, the hail isn't big, and it's not big on the radar, so I decided to, what they call, punch the core and go through it. So as we drove through it, we ended up at a point in the middle of it all where there was probably 1.5 inches, almost 2 inches of hail on the ground, all about a little less than marble size. But it was super exciting to be inside of that and safe inside of that. And this was shot, again, I needed that that sense of scale for everything. So this is, again, with this 14 millimeter Samyang on the Sony a7 III at this point in time, because I had been running time lapses. And when I run those, I don't like to run those on the A7R III because the file size is ridiculous, and it's just a pain to put together a time lapse with those big files. So A7R III, this would have been on auto ISO as well. I don't know what the ISO is off the top of my head, but I'm sure it was still probably right around the base ISO of 100, maybe up to 400 at the most. Again, south of Rapid City, South Dakota for this one. And the next one, I think this was later on in the day. We went to Custer State Park, which is probably one of my favorite places I've been in this country. It's just gorgeous. This is what the landscapes look like there. It's rolling hills, very green, lots of pine trees. It's just very beautiful. And we kind of raced around in Custer State Park. We had a lot of time to explore, and then towards the latter half of it, storms started to develop again. So we kind of raced around trying to get into an elevated position to watch the weather roll in. And I got a couple of, pretty decent shots of the stormy weather as it was coming in, but I wanted something more than just a landscape. And we got lucky and stopped at this spot that was kind of elevated. And I walked way out into this field, and then here comes pronghorn antelope, a pronghorn walking across the field. And I whistled a couple of times and made weird noises. He wasn't too impressed with me and didn't turn around and give me a face shot, but I was fine with shooting the backside of him as he kind of wandered in the direction of the stormy weather. I just felt like it kind of made the picture even better that he was headed into the darkness. I kind of dug that quite a bit. And this is with the Sony a7R III, and this is with the Tamron 70 to 180 on as well. So he's out there a little ways, fun shot to do, and really cool experience to be there in the Black Hills area. Highly recommend it. It's kind of like, unless you've been there before or have seen all of this kind of stuff before, to me, it was a very hidden gem in America. And having spent so much time in the desert Southwest and in the Rocky Mountains and in the Wasatch Mountains in Utah, this still, in my book, ranks in the top 3, probably in the top 2 of my favorite destinations in the country. So put that on your list, people. It's beautiful there. And then from the Rapid City area, so we did Custer State Park, which I have plenty of photos from there that are beautiful. Sylvan Lake in Custer State Park is amazing. But the whole purpose of this trip originally was to visit the Badlands. And it all started with with my truck, so I got the Ford Bronco and I got the Badlands edition, and I told myself, man, I'm gonna get the Badlands edition Bronco and I'm gonna take it to the Badlands. And so that's what we did. That was the whole purpose of this trip getting started, was this right here, this location. And I wish I knew the name of this spot. I had a few people ask me if that was Pinnacles Overlook. I really couldn't tell you. I can tell you that when we were there, this overlook was closed off. The road was barricaded, and there was a big mountain of gravel next to, like, I guess where you would park normally, and it was all shut down. But we still parked the Bronco and then walked the eighth of a mile back there out to the observation deck. And it was just Shelly and I for the longest time. And then some young guy came up and shared the sunset with us for a minute. But we were up there for quite a while, just the two of us. Something that surprised me with the Badlands, I've seen photos of the Badlands, but I honestly didn't dig into it and investigate it a lot. I was really blown away with the variety of color there. Now, I know I've had several people tell me, man, you got lucky. It was really green when you're there, because I know that it can get very hot, very dry, very brown, I guess you could say there. And we got lucky to have not just green vegetation, but also to have clouds in the sky, because again, a lot of photos I've seen from Badlands, it's blue skies. So this was an amazing moment to share there in the national park there. This is actually two shots blended together so that I could get more depth of field. This is shot with the Samyang 14 millimeter. I love that lens. If you're looking for a full frame lens and Samyang has a 14 millimeter for your mount, get it. It's like $400 lens, and it's a gem every time. So this is with the A7 R3. This is on a tripod. It's on that Vanguard tripod I showed you a minute ago. And just shot with two different focus points, one on the foreground, the lower left you see down here with the yellow rock down here, and then focused off to infinity out there, and then just blended together. And you can tell by looking at the sun, it was stopped down quite a bit. So this is probably like F14, so that I could get a little bit of a starburst going on there. Yeah, couldn't have asked for much more for a sunset there. I was really, really impressed with the Badlands. Really recommend it. There's not much there. The little town of Wall has, what everybody knows it for, Wall Drug or whatever. Very tourist trappy. But the Badlands is gorgeous, and I would recommend visiting it a couple of different times throughout the day. When we first got to Wall, Shelly 100% understandably wanted a nap or to relax, because we had just spent, I don't know how many hours in the truck, and I'm like a crackhead, and I'm like, let's go. And so she said, go ahead, take off. I'll go out for sunset. So I went earlier in the day, and it was a completely different look and feel. Less clouds in the sky, but way more contrast. I got some fun black and whites out of that. But then coming back at night when the light is really warm, it was like a painting. It was like a living, breathing painting out there. So beautiful place in the middle of nowhere. And so from South Dakota, kind of last minute, I was checking weather forecasts as I knew I would do on this trip, and saw that there was going to be some really good storm activity in Nebraska. And just looking at the map, I realized where everything looked like it was going to kind of start off was almost straight down from us in Wall, South Dakota. So that's what we did. Instead of heading across South Dakota, like into Minnesota and all that, and headed back home, we went straight down into Nebraska. And this was just into Nebraska somewhere. I really couldn't tell you where it was at. Again, I'll reiterate it. Not having a plan, not having to stick to a schedule makes all the difference in the world. Shelly and I were driving, and the clouds were just looking really cool. And we were looking for just a break, a leg stretcher, a place to shoot. and we saw this little white dirt road that just led off into these little mini badlands in Nebraska. So that's what we did. We drove probably a mile down this road and got out there and picked up some rocks and snapped a few photos, and kind of coming back out of there, noticed this. It's actually a big bulldozer sitting off in the distance. So got out that 70 to 180 again at 180 millimeters, and then just really exaggerated the composition, put it in portrait orientation, kept like the bottom quarter of the frame, anything to do with the earth, and put the rest of it as sky. So, and again, Sony A7R3 for this. The R3 got a lot of use from me, because I didn't know in some of these shots if I would end up wanting to just crop in and use only a section of it. So really enjoyed having the ability to do that. It was kind of nice. As far as settings go, it would have been base ISO for this too. And yeah, I know I should have shared that. Shelly said we saw the biggest wolf spider ever. And it's funny because we were driving out and it was so big, I saw it running across the road, and I stopped the truck to get out to go see what in the hell it was. And we get up to it, and it's a female wolf spider carrying all her babies on her back, nightmare fuel, that kind of stuff, but very cool nonetheless. And let's see, next shot, storm chase day. So this is going to be south of North Platte, Nebraska. I will go on a sidetrack here for just a minute. We drove again from South Dakota down to North Platte. Some really interesting scenery and some really miserable scenery on that drive. But we arrived in North Platte, and I immediately found us a hotel room. And Shelly said, if you're going to go out chasing, I'm just going to hang back here. I'm kind of whipped. But before you go, let's go grab something to eat. And I said, all right, let's do it. Asked her where she wanted to go, and she said, well, there's an Applebee's right across the parking lot from our hotel. Let's just walk over there. And I said, well, I don't know if it's bad luck to go to Applebee's before a storm chase, because usually that's where storm chasers go after they chase, but we're hungry. Let's just go do this. So we're walking over there, and parked in front is a green Toyota 4Runner with this like hard shell roof rack thing on it. And it looked familiar to me, like I had seen it in somebody's YouTube video before. And I just kind of put it out of my mind, and we went inside, and the greeter seated us right next to a table that had people at it. The whole place was mostly empty where we were sitting, but they sat us right across from a group of people. So I was a little irritated by that, because I don't know, just having a little privacy would be nice. But then I look over at the table, and I see this guy that I've been watching his YouTube videos for years. His name is Mike Olbensky. And I highly recommend people get on YouTube after this show is done, and look up Mike Olbensky. It's Olbinski, Mike Olbensky. His time-lapse work of storms is mind-blowing. It is so mind-blowing that it's been used in major motion pictures. And if I'm not mistaken, he has an Emmy for his time lapses. Astounding work. So I looked over, I saw that it was Mike Olbensky. He had a couple of people with him, because he will do a couple of tours each storm season, I guess, let people tag along with him. And I totally turned into like a 13-year-old girl seeing her favorite pop star. I almost squealed and said, hey, Mike Olbensky. And he turns and he goes, hey, do I know you? I said, nope, but I've been watching your videos for years. And I just started running off at the mouth like I was losing my mind. And he said, are you out storm chasing? I said, yep, we're chasing. And I said, hey, can I get a selfie with you? And he was super cool, stood up, and I took a selfie with him, and he took a selfie of us together. And, he wished us luck on chasing, asked Shelly if she was going to chase too, and just super awesome guy. So that was how my whole storm chasing thing in Nebraska started. It was definitely a high note. Super pumped on that. But so wrapped up our dinner and walked Shelly back to the hotel. I got my gear around, and then jumped in the truck and started looking at the radar. And by the time I got on the road, there were storm chasers everywhere. There were mobile Doppler radar trucks. There were people from universities, from the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, everything, YouTubers. It was bananas. It was like the coolest experience to see so many people that were as excited about this as I was out there. So I found a storm cell that I wanted to chase, talked to a storm chaser on a back road about, planning and where we thought it would initiate. So kind of got myself into position for it and started shooting the weather as it developed. And that's what you see here. So this is probably about 30 miles, maybe 25 miles. It would have been southeast of North Platte, Nebraska. And this is just waiting as the storm develops and works its way towards me. Single shot Sony A7 III, Samyang 14 millimeter f2.8. This is just sitting on a tripod, and I'm just enjoying the weather as it's rolling in and just popping off shots here and there, just watching the light. The light was just ridiculous because a lot of these storms tend to develop much later in the day. The air gets unstable as you work your way into the evening and they start to develop, which is perfect. As a photographer, you wait for the good light, you wait for golden light and golden hour, and that's when these pop off. So that was what this was, just waiting for the storm to roll in. And I sat there and just listened to the crickets chirping and the western meadowlarks doing their calls and just watched the weather march in towards me. It was stunning. And it goes from stunning to kind of scary and pretty quick. So this is that same storm cell. As it gets closer and closer, it starts blocking out more and more light. I've changed positions once or twice, staying ahead of it. By the time I got to this point right here, it's definitely turning into a monster. The winds, it's interesting. The storm is moving towards me, towards where you see the shot taken from, but the winds are all blowing towards it. It is sucking in and drawing in all of this heat and just generating all of this energy as it builds into this just massive cell. So I'm still probably like 8-9 miles away from it, and with a 14 millimeter, and it still doesn't even come close to fitting in the frame. So the next shot is the same cell as I've worked my way further away from it, trying to get into a better position to shoot it. And keep in mind, I've only done this twice. Once I had Mark with me to kind of help, look at radar and things like that and guide it. And it's not like he was super experienced at storm chasing either. But this time it was just me out racing around trying to figure things out. But I was lucky enough to at least get this decent shot of the supercell in the background behind me as it's just, again, continuing to build and build and build, hoping for next year to one up this even more. And this is with the Tamron 17-28 at this point in time with this one. This was me just getting outside of the rain, opening up the door on my truck, standing on the running board and just firing off this shot as hail started to begin again in this location. And this is after it had passed. I don't even know what to say about this. I've seen these types of crepuscular rays before. I've never seen it like this in Michigan. It's almost like they appear to be coming up from the ground. Shelly has way better shots of these rays that she actually got from the hotel parking lot. I'm out risking life and limb in this stuff, and she's literally just walking out behind the hotel. There's a big giant cornfield, and she got just stunning shots there without having to go through what I did. But I had to just throw a shot of my truck in there with this rainbow. It was so fitting that I got everything all in this one afternoon, from hail to rainbow to these crepuscular rays, and even like the supercell shot that I had been hoping for quite some time. That was kind of, getting towards the end of my storm chase. This one definitely, as things are wrapping up, can't really see it, but on the other side of the truck, on the other side of that barbed wire fence, I've got a camera set up running a time lapse, and I've shared that time lapse online, I think. And this is the storm has passed quite a ways away. It continued to build, kept getting bigger and bigger. Me not being experienced in these big chases out west, didn't know that I probably should have just stayed on this side of it where I'm at now and just followed it for probably the next 2 hours. It continued to grow and grow and grow. It was a long track storm. It went on through the night before it even died down. So there was a lot more to it that I could have shot. I just didn't. Lesson learned there. But again, the light in this isn't an HDR image. This isn't a shit ton of post-processing. This is kind of what it was. It was just bananas. There's all this crazy, weird light going on that I can't even explain. It was just magical. And that is pretty much it. Didn't have a whole lot of questions during this, but if anybody does have any questions about storm chasing or interest in it, definitely reach out to me. Like I said, I'm not super experienced at it, but I approach it from a different lean than a lot of the storm chasers that are out there. Most storm chasers are out there for the chase. And then there's a big chunk of them that are out there for the science. And then there's an even smaller subset of storm chasers out there that are like you and I would be, and that's for the photos or video of it. So definitely going to do it again. It's kind of a earlier in the summer endeavor when you're out west. They continue to get storms into this time of year, but the big storm season is pretty much done in the plain states for now. So next year it'll probably be May again, maybe like late April, May. I'm going to do it all over again. So if anybody wants to follow Shelly and I around out in the plain states, start a conversation up, definitely going to do it. And I can recommend, gear to bring and stuff like that for it. It was a lot of fun. As a photographer, I can't reiterate it enough though, that plan your vacation without a plan. It was the best experience ever. If you're on a schedule, you feel like, oh, it would have been cool to do this, but we just don't have time. We need to go here next or whatever. We went at this completely wide open, and it turned out to be probably the best trip I've done. So that's all I got to say about that. And I've been babbling on for 50 minutes. So that said, I'm going to cut it off for the night. The next show, Jerry will be on. I promise. I know everybody's here for him. Nobody wants to hear me talk for an hour, but until the next episode, looking forward to talking to you guys and sharing some new images and talking shop with you. You guys take care. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in 2. It's still on. I never hit the end button. I just said, forget it. I'm out of here. I'll see you guys later. And I never actually hit the end button. So I'm doing it now. Take care, you guys.